We'll start off with the presentation, and you saw this last time round, so that's nothing new. And what I'm going to do is kind of go round the wheel and just identify some of the tools which we use at each step. And remember that this isn't a single wheel, that in the course of a research programme you may go round the wheel several times, starting off with some very preliminary research, and then as you get more understanding, the project or the programme grows and you start to engage with a wider set of stakeholders. And it's only really when you get towards the end of this process that you're likely to have any real policy recommendations that you really want to try and, if you like, promote. And of course, they won't just be your policy recommendations, because you'll have been working very closely with all the other stakeholders in the process, so with policymakers. So by that time, you'll have a community or a coalition of actors who are interested to try and clarify and implement solutions to the problems that you've been working on together. So to start off with, this first step is to map the political context. In order to try and shape, influence policy processes, you really need to understand what those processes are. And I showed this very briefly last time, and this is a framework which we have used quite a lot, simply to help people to leave no stone unturned as they look at the context which they're working in. So there are things you should try not to forget to look at. So it's not really supposed to be a comprehensive framework. There's stuff that's happening outside. So, for example, in highly indebted sub-Saharan African countries, international development donor policies are hugely influential about what happens within that country. So in that context, there are big external factors you need to be aware of. And then I talked earlier on about some of the questions in the political context, in the evidence domain and in the links domain. And they boil down to four, really. The external context: who are the key actors, what's their agenda, how do they influence the political context you're working in? So those are the sort of basic questions you should be asking yourself. Who else out there can help or hinder what you're trying to do? And then within the context, is there political interest in change? Is there room for change? How do the decision makers perceive the problem? What is what we call the prevailing policy narrative? You know, the tragedy of the commons was a very powerful policy narrative which completely paralysed a more rational approach to managing common resources in the development field generally. I worked a lot in arid parts of Africa looking at nomadic pastoral communities. You know, and the theory was that they couldn't manage this collectively owned resource, and so they tried to have divide them up into grazing plots and have controlled grazing, which of course undermined the whole principle of collective management of rangelands. So there are these policy narratives which can be hugely powerful and sometimes completely wrong. Then the evidence, is it there? Do you have convincing evidence to support the policy proposition you have? Is it relevant to the policy problems? Well, of course it will be if you've been following this kind of iterative cycle. How different is it to this prevalent view? If it's very different, then communicating it is going to be more difficult than if it's quite similar. Does it need repackaging? And then who else is out there who can help you to achieve what you're trying to achieve? Are there networks you can work with? How best to get this information from, if you like, from the research domain into the policy domain? Is it worth using the media? On some policy issues it is, on some policy issues it's the kiss of death. So you need to understand the policy environment to decide how best to try and get this idea out there. So those are the four very simple questions, and in your handout there's a thing which we called the 28 questions, 28 key questions. And again, to try and avoid leaving any stone unturned as you're starting to think about the context you're working in. So that's one tool, and your handout has the simple questions, the complicated questions, and a sort of three-circle thing which you can draw in if you want to later on. So that's one tool that it might be interesting to try out a bit later on. Identifying the key stakeholders. And of course, and these are sort of interrelated tools. So obviously, as part of mapping the political context, you will be identifying the key stakeholders. But you need to think a bit more about them, not only just to identify them. And there's a tool which some colleagues of mine invented called the Alignment, Influence and Interest Matrix. And it's just a simple evolution of a standard two-dimensional a matrix, and the first two dimensions are, for an individual, how much do they agree with what you're saying? So that's the general level of alignment. Do they broadly agree with what you're saying or broadly disagree with what you're saying? That's dimension one. Dimension two is how interested are they in what you're doing? And again, they can either be interested or not interested. And already, if you start to map people onto this, you can start to see people who are very interested in what you're doing and who are broadly aligned with you. And clearly, these are the people you really need to work very closely with to try and promote what you're trying to achieve. There are people who are very interested in the issue but actually disagree with you, and they're the people you've really got to nobble. They're the people that can prevent you from achieving what you want to achieve. So you need to challenge their existing beliefs. You need to try and convince them that the results of your evidence are such that they should change their views. There are others who agree with you but aren't really interested. Well, if you can co-opt them, if you can get them interested, then they can help you to achieve what you want to achieve. And there are people who maybe disagree with you and aren't terribly interested, and frankly, you can probably forget about them. So that's the first dimension, and you can already start to identify people and how to work with them. And obviously, you want to get the people who disagree with you to agree with you, and you want to get the people who aren't interested to be interested. The second dimension is to identify who has power. And I think power is central in this process. You need to be working with the people who are powerful. People who disagree with you but have no influence in the context, you can pretty much ignore. But people who disagree with you and are powerful, you really need to try and make sure that you can get them on side. So that's the third dimension, And the fourth dimension is how much can you actually influence these people? Ideally, you would work with all the powerful people in all of these boxes, but you may simply not be able to get to them. So you need to be pragmatic and realistic. Who can we influence? And then try and work with the most powerful people that you have a chance of influencing to try and get them alongside and to work with you. And this is an example. This is a project which is being implemented by a range of NGOs that are working on in nomadic pastoral parts of sub-Saharan Africa. And what they're trying to do is to promote a recognition of the fact that nomadic pastoralism is really the only sustainable lifestyle for these people. And so much of what's been done in pastoral parts of Africa is done on the basis either of sort of ethnography, these are fine, proud people, we should help them, or environment, these are nomadic pastoralists that are eating the shit out of the environment and we've got to stop them from doing that. And actually, these are people who have developed over a very long time a sustainable lifestyle, if only other people wouldn't stop snitching their dry season grazing grounds and planting crops on them. And what is needed is a new way of thinking about nomadic pastoralism. And they mapped all the different stakeholders involved in that. And there are those in that group already thinking the same way, already active, develop a community of practice. There are these people who aren't very interested in the issue, so a whole load of NGOs, a whole load of government agencies, not really interested. Some sort of media dissemination campaign to get them interested. There are some people who disagree with the principle who are involved in some of these big alternative projects. Well, the thing that's going to convince them is successful pilot projects, so pilots and evaluations of projects. And then there's a bunch of people you might not be able to read, that UN agencies. This isn't my work, and I'm not saying this. This was the conclusion of the people who were thinking this through at the time, and they thought these are actually very difficult people to influence. So you can start then to map out the kinds of people you need to be working with and the sorts of things you need to be doing with them and the sorts of characteristics of those people that will help you to do sensible things with them. And in your handout you have, I think something comes up, there you are. You have a handout which explains this in a bit more detail and explains the process in detail. And on the back of the handout is a little 4-cell matrix which you can fill in if you want to. Okay, so that's tool number 2, which you may or may not want to try out in a few minutes when we get to that stage. The next stage is identify the desired behaviour change. Now, we focus on behaviour because actually policies change through changes in behaviour. Now, it may be the change in behaviour which is necessary in order to write a new law, That's a sort of manifestation of a change in behaviour. But even if there's a new law or a new policy and people don't actually obey the law or implement the policy because their behaviour doesn't change, then there is no change in policy, effectively. We talk about policy as being a purposive course of action by a group of people. That's one definition we quite like. Or the other thing that we trot out tritely, policy is what policy does. Policy is about behaviour change. So if you want to influence policy, you need to identify what kind of behaviour of what kind of actors do you want to change. And there are lots of different ways of doing this. There's a tool which has been developed by the International Development Research Centre of Canada, IDRC, called outcome mapping, which is a kind of a whole planning, implementation and evaluation framework for, this is looking at international development projects, which is based on behavioural change as its fundamental principle. And we really like this, A, because it's based on behaviour, B, because it recognises explicitly that all we can do is contribute to a process of change. You know, to think that we can actually make a change and that that change can be attributed back to us is complete rubbish. So all we're doing is we're contributing to a process of change with a very large number of actors. The process of change takes a long time, and you need to sort of think in steps, step by step. And the fourth principle embedded within it, which we really like, is that you are an actor in this process. So you need to observe your relationship with the context and monitor how your behaviour changes in relation to the changing context outside. And I've just thought of a fifth one. The fifth one is actually part of the sort of evaluation, monitoring and evaluation dimensions of this framework, which is that there are things that you might expect to happen, and clearly you need to be seeing whether those things happen. But there are unexpected things which happen as well, and it's very important to be tracking the unexpected, and often you can learn more from the unexpected things than the expected things. So this actually underpins our whole approach, and you may remember that there was a big circle. In fact, I think it's going to be, if you want to know more about that, there's a very good book, Outcome Mapping. And this underpins our whole approach, which you'll notice is called RAPID, which doesn't mean quick, it means Research and Policy and Development Programme, outcome mapping approach, because it underpins the approach. So we think this is a very good principle. Then you need to develop a strategy. There are bundles of approaches to do this. Force field analysis, a quite nice approach out of the business sector. Figure out what you want to happen, figure out the forces which can help that to happen, figure out the forces which can prevent that from happening. If you're an anal retentive, you can score them and you can see whether they add up more on one side than the other and decide whether to get out of bed in the morning or not. And again, the important thing is to think about, well, what ability do we have to actually influence any of these forces which are promoting or opposing change anyway? Quite a nice strategic planning tool. Analyse your internal capacity to affect change, and I mean the one that we use is the classical SWOT analysis. If you're trying to think about how can we do things, you know, what are our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats? So what type of policy influencing skills do we have? How could we use them more effectively? You know, the opportunities, who are our strongest allies, when have they worked with us? The threats, you know, the external political context, within which there may or may not be policy opportunities, and also what other things are out there that can affect our ability to do what we're trying to do. So quite a simple strategic planning tool which we use quite a lot. Number 6, establishing monitoring and learning frameworks. And you may remember I said in the beginning talk that although the policy cycle is in theory this cycle I showed, and the last step is monitoring and evaluation, it's astonishing how little monitoring and evaluation is done of anything, whether it's policies, programmes, or anything really. And it's really important if you're trying to support a change process to check whether you're on track or not frequently. And as I said earlier on, you know, there are things that you can do to check that you're moving in the direction you think you're moving in and achieving the changes which you're hoping to achieve. But also you need to be very aware of other things which are happening and keep track of those and reflect upon them frequently. And one of the tools that we use a lot for that is what we call an after-action review, which is a very simple technique just to check at the end of anything you're trying to do whether it did what you expected it to do or not. And it's a fantastic tool. The only problem I have with it was invented by the American military as a way of figuring out whether they could kill people more effectively. You know, after every mission they get together a mixed group of of the people who've been involved in it, and you'll see it says a rank-free environment. And they ask 4 questions. What was supposed to happen? What actually happened? Why was there a difference between what we expected and what actually happened, and what can we learn from it? And this is a fantastically useful tool that you can apply at many different scales, a very quick sort of 5-minute thing at the end, or actually that would be a bit quick, sort of 1-hour thing at the end of a workshop, maybe a half-day thing at the end of a conference, maybe a 1-day or even a 2- or 3-day workshop involving all the different stakeholders at the end of a larger programme. So it's a useful, scalable tool just to track what you hoped to happen and what did happen. And actually measuring impact is fantastically difficult, as I said before lunch. One of the things that we use a lot are stories, because that's how we communicate as individuals, through stories. And stories of change are a particular form of story, which describe a situation before something, the context within which the situation happened, what the situation was after, what changed and why. And collecting stories of change is a very good way of trying to determine whether or not something has changed and why. And that sort of approach has been developed by a number of people. One of them, a guy called Rick Davis, developed this up into an approach where you collect lots of stories from lots of different stakeholders involved in whatever you're involved in, and then you can do a systematic analysis of the significance of the stories from the different stakeholders, and that can really help you to figure out whether you really are convincing policymakers, or whether the NGOs you're working with actually think that your approach is a good approach. And within a whole programme, you can figure out how to change the programme in order to more effectively achieve what you want to achieve. And a guy called Dave Snowden, who you may have heard about, a sort of a real guru in the complexity arena, has developed this a stage further. He calls them micro-narratives, and it's a way of collecting a very large number of stories and analysing them statistically in order to identify the kind of hotspots about which you may want to do something, either to stop them or to amplify them further. So that's it in terms of the rapid overview of what we're doing. And that took about 15 minutes, and we've got an hour. So the idea is that you spend 20-25 minutes now doing this. But before we do that, does anybody have any questions, any burning questions? And I remember I forgot to arrange for the microphone to be available at this point. But does anybody have any burning questions about this? Actually, let me just show the next slide before you do that, because this might make your questions burn. So the idea is you work together with your neighbour or little group, so sort of organise yourselves, or do it on your own if you want to. Think about some work that you've been doing, trying to generate or use research-based evidence to make or influence a decision. Choose one example to work on. If you're a group, you'll have lots of different opportunities. Try out either the context evidence links framework or the AIIM matrix, or if you're quick, both. See whether it works, whether it helps you to identify things you didn't already know, or things you already know, but just to see them in a different light. Think about how you might apply it more widely. And then what we're going to do afterwards is just see whether any of you want to say anything about it at all. So think about what you might want to say about it, and at the end we'll be passing a microphone around. Okay, so this is the last slide. So, and I just thought if I put the steps, so these are the very simple steps in each of the approaches, which are in your handout anyway, and I've explained already. And I'll leave that up through the whole thing. But I thought people might have questions about the approaches, which I could answer as well. So go ahead.
Hi, I'm Deborah O'Connell from CSIRO. I had a question that I was burning to ask Gerald and you through your talks as well, but now seems as good a time as any. Can you maybe give a little bit of guidance around the issue of the idea that scientists are supposed to be observers, I suppose, and provide impartial, if then else but, type of evidence, versus a much more active agent approach? This sort of approach would horrify some in science, because you're seeking to influence an actual outcome as opposed to provide an if then else impartial, so-called impartial observer. I'd just be interested in hearing your thoughts.
Well, I wouldn't dare to pronounce generally, but I'll tell you in ODI, the way that I conceptualise this, ODI is a think tank, and there are people in ODI who also think that if we get our sort of hands dirty trying to do the sorts of policy things that we recommend to people, that undermines our integrity and our independence. My view is, within ODI, we need to be doing a percentage of work at the kind of more academic end of the research arena, probably, I don't know, 10, 20%. Most of our work, as I explained this morning, is kind of contract-driven, so we are inevitably engaging with other stakeholders. And we need to be doing some work at the other end, and this is where I argue with my colleagues whether it should be 10, 20, 30 or 40%. I would go for probably about 30%, where we actually do it, where we get our hands dirty trying to do the stuff which we're recommending other people should do. But the important thing is to do that in a way which enables you to learn and reflect critically about whether it's actually working or not, and what more can we learn about those policy recommendations and feed that back through. And I think that would enhance our credibility as an organisation rather than undermine it. And the example I gave you earlier on of the Indonesia Knowledge Sector programme is a programme, I mean it's not our programme, it's an AusAid programme within which we're playing a very small part, primarily on the demand side. That's an opportunity for us as an organisation to see whether the sorts of recommendations we make work and to learn from doing it. Is this a general question or a specific one?
A specific one.
Okay.
Stephen Prowse from the Wound Cooperative Research Centre. I just wanted to ask you a question about stakeholder mapping and the difference between individual stakeholders, say people in the organisations, and the organisations themselves. And you focused on the people. Sometimes mapping the organisations is as equal or greater importance.
Yeah, no, well, I agree entirely, and Gerald's presentation before lunch was talking about these tools are all scalable, and certainly in our experience you often have to map the individuals within an organisation as well as the organisation as a whole. And even within ODI, for example, we've got a new director who's come in. We're not quite sure how much he's going to be interested in the work that my group do versus the groups which the policy organisations do. And what we've decided we need to do is to really get to know what his interests are so that we can make sure that there is space for our ongoing work. So even within your own organisation, mapping the interests of the different actors can be useful in terms of promoting ideas which you think are important. So you need to do it at all these different levels, I think. Any other burning questions at this time? No? Good. Okay. Well, you know what you've got to do. Well, you don't have to do it. You can go away and have another coffee if you want to. But if you would like to, on your own or with your neighbour or with a small group, get together. And what I suggest you do, let's go back a slide, is have a bit of a chat. Try and, not too long of a chat because we haven't got very long. Try and identify a specific piece of work you're doing where you would like to improve the value and usefulness of some research or the uptake and impact of a piece of research. It can be anywhere along that kind of project cycle. That you'd just be interested to try doing some of these tools with. And then in your group, if you're in a group, you need to decide which one you're going to apply the tool to. And then just apply the tool. So one of you is the informant, and the other, or the others, ask the questions. And there is, the questions are here. If I was you, I would stick to the simple questions on the political context, or you'll still be here this time tomorrow, rather than the detailed ones. And just start to jot some things down and see what kind of a conversation that promotes. And again, on the stakeholder mapping one, again, just see if you can work through an example and just see whether it works. Oh yes, if you're online, the handouts are available online in two places online. I think on the in the resources page, is that right? And also on the registration page. So if you want to, I'm supposed to look at the camera. Where's the camera? There. If you would like to do that, please have a go. And is this being monitored? If they send in emails? Okay, so somebody, if you want to contribute to the discussion afterwards, do that as well. Very good. Off you go. I mean, hopefully not literally off you go, but somebody lock the doors. Okay. So Gabrielle said I should use the bell. And also, who's in control of this thing? This just counted down to 0 in red. So I thought, who is trying to control me in this sneaky way? Anyway, I'm sorry, you haven't had enough time to do it at all properly, but I hope you've had enough time to kind of at least get a handle on some of the challenges that are involved in it. And I mean, it would be very nice if you had actually had enough time to form a view about how it might be useful or not useful. And this is completely unstructured, so if anybody wants to provide any kind of feedback, positive, negative, anything at all, stick your hand up. There are microphones, and let's just see what you have to say.
From the ANU, I've just been doing it with my colleague Ruth here, looking at the context, evidence, and framework. So the first exercise, we just didn't get past the simple questions, external environment. So that's my comment, that there's an awful lot of stuff in this. It's really quite, you need quite a lot of time, and to structure it well, you'd probably do better if you had a little bit of practice.
Well, I mean, you certainly need more than 15 minutes. I think you're not going to get very far in 15 minutes. Did you bump into anything in the external context that was at all surprising?
Ruth may have a comment, but not really. I mean, I think that we just found that there was a lot to find out, a lot to say, and I was left with the feeling that we still hadn't got by any means to the bottom of it. So, but then it was a very interesting exercise and a good way to structure thinking.
Very good. Anybody else? Yeah. There's a microphone on its way down.
Christian Roth, CSIRO. I find these tools helpful, and they certainly help structure. I mean, I wouldn't follow them slavishly, but it is sort of a prompt. One thing that we struggled with is actually defining the boundaries between external and political context. And the challenge we, as Australians going to work in Asia, would always encounter that you can't actually contextualize if you don't know the culture and you don't know the language. Yeah. So don't kid yourself. You probably can't, or you might not be the best person to do it, but you've got to make sure in the design that you do have those people who can do it with you and for you. So I think, yes, these frameworks are useful, but it doesn't mean you've got to do everything yourself. I think it's also thinking through how you can distribute some of those things, and then the challenge is bringing it together at some point.
No, I mean, I agree with you entirely, and what I said when I introduced the context evidence links framework. It's really a kind of make sure you don't forget to ask yourself some questions which might be important, and thinking about the external context is actually quite important. I was working in Kenya looking at decentralised animal health care, and we were setting up paravet projects all over the place. They're hugely popular, spreading like wildfire, illegal. Because Kenya has the same legislation as the UK, only veterinary surgeons are allowed to treat sick animals. And so it was very much under the radar, but gradually we were working with local vets, and they were very keen on this idea, and a network emerged of people talking about this stuff. And we got this, finally, we got an invitation from the Director of Livestock Services to go and talk to him about these things. We thought, yeah, we've broken through here. And we had a meeting arranged about a week later, and then the day before, we got a call from his secretary who said, I'm sorry, the director's not available today. Oh, well, when will he be available? Oh, he's not sure. So we kept ringing back, wasn't available. And he just stopped being interested in it. And we thought, what's going on here? There are lots of vets around interested in this. And what we discovered was that there was a big EC-funded programme coming in, EC World Bank money, to provide funds to provide loans for vets in government to set up as private practitioners. Boof, out goes our idea. And if we had been smarter, and if we had known about that, we could have worked on that. So, I mean, I think you're right. It's a kind of aid memoir, really. Very good. Any other comments on anything? Yes, please. There's a microphone on its way down. Here, man in the blue shirt. In front of you on the left, right for you. There you go.
Jim Thomas, University of North Carolina. I found myself going often to the answer of money. Big influences of money will change priorities, will make things happen. The example you just gave was one where they shifted their attention to another source of money. Yep. one of the things that would help me in going through this exercise would be perhaps some refined questions about how to be thinking about money.
Okay, but then our colleague here said there's too many questions already. You know, it is a question about how many questions do you put in there. But I agree. I mean, money is very important.
Right. So maybe my point is not so much a critique of the tool, but telling you what I could use for what I am working on, and whether perhaps there is a way to reference, you know, if this is a big factor, you could turn here and look at these finer questions.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. Okay, you have a microphone already.
Leonie Pearson from the University of Canberra. For us, I think our group is quite large, and it took us most of that session to actually refine the problem.
Yeah.
So once we could get a clearer problem, we could move through the questions, but that was our hardest task.
Yes. Okay, there were some other hands up over here, I think.
Thank you. I'm David MacDonald from the Australian National University. I did a very quick spin right through all the headings of the CEL framework relating to the introduction of electronic cigarettes in Australia. And the one thing that particularly struck me, which was an insight for me, under the evidence heading, the prompt about are the concepts that come from the evidence new, or are they familiar, or are they unfamiliar, and the implications of that for packaging. So, in my thinking, yes, packaging of evidence for the audience is important, but it's not just the evidence, but thinking through people's likely responses to the type of perhaps new evidence and the new concepts that might underlie it. It's a different way of thinking about the nature of the evidence and its presentation, different for me anyway.
Yeah. Very interesting. Did you identify anybody who would be opposed to the introduction of electronic cigarettes? So can we have the microphone back briefly? I mean, people who might oppose you in that.
Yes, almost all the most powerful actors would be opposed.
Okay, and what, you didn't whiz through the AIIM matrix also in 10 minutes, did you?
No, only in a flash through my mind, thinking that that's obviously a next tool which maps across iteratively.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, it would be very interesting to think through about why they oppose it, what kind of evidence might make them change their mind, or is it you know, straight, well, the cigarette industry is a nightmare politically. But anyway, thank you very much. So we stole the microphone from the chap over there.
Robert Anton from University of Canberra. One of our main questions or discussions was around that tension between policy, people who are developing policy within government, and academics. And so the fact that academics will publish in fairly technical journals, and the public policy people might not read those journals. So for academics who are working on informing policy, we're publishing in grey literature. The academic institutions aren't counting the grey literature in terms of the output. But also just in terms of the timeframes for things like the grants that we might be applying for. And so when we apply for grants, they might be long-term, 3-year grants, and the policymakers are saying, well, 3 years, there'll be new government in 3 years, you know. So, and so they're sort of looking at solutions for their next new policy, which might be in the next month or two, whereas we're looking at 3-year grants. And so just those sort of tensions between the two different areas.
And did you apply it to a particular case in your mind, or was this a sort of general thing? And if it was a particular case, did it help you start thinking about how to resolve this in any way?
For the 4 people we had in our group, there were a number of cases. I work in areas called social research in the Murray-Darling Basin, and so there's been a long-term policy in terms of water allocations. We've got another person who is working on an index called the Australian Early Development Index, and so there was sort of a number of... And so thinking through these simple questions here sort of helped to get that sort of policy perspective on it, but then sort of thinking, well, how do you then translate that into the academic outcomes that we also need? So we can look at the the external environment, the political context in terms of that public policy, but then how do we transfer that into an academic environment where we're supposed to be technical experts in a very narrow field and publishing in really good academic journals?
Yeah, it's all extra work, this, isn't it, which isn't adequately reflected in the incentive structures within which you work, which I imagine are much more driven by getting peer-reviewed publications out of the door than about engaging in real-world problems. And I mean, I think that's one of the things that Gabrielle is hoping that this kind of conference might start to influence. Any other hands? We have about 5 minutes left. Yeah. Oh, we have 12 minutes left, according to this.
Ruth Harris from NCF. Just one quick comment. I found the what is their agenda question really quite helpful for my PhD. What really struck me in asking that question of the key actors was the real challenge that our policymakers have in dealing with these many competing agendas. So it was a great question for me.
Good.
I just wanted to add that this example also is quite complicated because Ruth's topic is the national food policy.
Yeah. So you need a bit more than 15 minutes on that one, I should think. Oh yes, please.
Simon Ratkinson from Sydney University. We've looked at the iterative processes and in policy development, and actually we find that a very destructive process because it's not adaptive.
Sorry, what process?
It becomes destructive because it's a stop and go. It's essentially a digital on and off process as you iterate between, and it's non-adaptive. I wondered if you've thought about any changed approaches that might enable a less iterative, if you like, stop-start process.
I'm sorry, I may be misunderstanding here. Are you talking about a policy process that you're working on, which is itself stop-start, stop-start, or are you saying that the iterative process we're recommending is stop-start, stop-start?
Well, you mentioned iterative in a number of occasions about the process, and I just wondered if you had any thought about that.
Well, we don't. Well, that's why I wanted to check what you were thinking. We don't see an iterative process as a stop-start process. It's a continuous process of reflection, and it's based. Well, I didn't know it was based on this, but the sort of Deming cycle is an iterative cycle. So figure out what you want to do it, see whether it works, change what you're doing. So it's a continuous cycle. It's not necessarily stop-start. I mean, we could. There are project management techniques which break up projects into stages.
Yeah, I think what you hit on there was the reflective process.
Yes.
And what we certainly look at in failing organisations is their lack of reflective capacity, which then maybe allows them to approach problems in this way.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Anything else? We've got about 2 minutes left, so that's fine by me. So thank you all very much indeed for your attention, and I think some very interesting things are starting to emerge here, and if you feel inclined to carry on trying to use them, do that. We would be very interested to hear about your experience with them, and you can email me. My email address is on the well, it's going to be all over the place, isn't it, in this conference. And I brought with me a very small number of bits of paper. I'm getting the evil eye from Gabrielle here because we're not supposed to be paper focused. But anyway, I've got some bits of paper which I thought I might need about 20 of them. So I've got 20 of this briefing paper and 20 of a brochure about the RAPID programme, and you're very welcome if you want one to come and collect it. Thank you very much.